we'll go ahead and share my screen. So when you log into community services or Service Point, you may have noticed that over on the navigation tabs on the left-hand side of your screen, you have this lovely little admin button. And I'm guessing that most people probably haven't explored this area in great depth, but that's what we're going to do today. So we're going to go ahead and click on the admin button. And as an agency administrator, you do have certain functionality that is available to you. And you can see those different kind of areas here. So the first one is going to be your email admin. This is not an area that I'm going to go into a lot of depth. If everybody has, does everybody have like an email like that they use, probably like Gmail or their Microsoft Outlook or something like that? If you have that, that usually works really, really well. For some communities that are more information referral based, they actually use this email admin so that they can keep track of emails that they're sending out to providers for like updating information. For you guys, don't even worry about this area. Same with license admin. This is going to be an area that Derek primarily focuses in on and allocates license to you. So the only thing that you may want to look at within this license admin is if there's any license allocated to your provider. And so looks like Jorge does not have any. News admin. I'm sure you guys have probably seen the news here, the system news and the agency news. System news is information that is put in by the system administrators, such as Derek. Agency news is information that can be put in by basically anyone, because case managers have this access as well. So if you are updating your agency news, which is information that is only seen by you guys. So right now I'm actually shadowing, I think it's Jorge, with Cecil. And so other users at Cecil should be able to see this information in here. If you're not associated with Cecil, you're probably seeing either nothing or something very different. So the news admin allows you to add news to that agency news area. And you can do that by going through, clicking add news. You can pop in the headline. You can put in, the content in this area down here. There's plenty of formatting options that you can go through. You can even embed links into the content that you're putting in the news, or you can have a separate link down here, and then the date of the news, which is a required field. And then once you save that information, then under the agency news area, you will see your agency news. So this is good for communicating with other users at your agency what is going on. Maybe you have some new funding available. Maybe it's Christina's birthday or something. So whatever you want to put in there. This area, not this area. The news admin is also where you can remove news. So if things do get a little bit outdated or some older news, you can always click the little delete icon, and it will remove that news after confirming that that's really what you want to do. All right, provider admin. So this is going to be one of like the main areas that we're going to focus in on right here. Provider admin is where we can configure a lot of these settings for our providers. And so if we click on this provider admin area, it's going to take us to a provider search. And with this provider search, if we just execute like just a blank search, it will show all of the providers that you have access to. Now, again, I'm shadowing Jorge from Cecil, and he has access to the Cecil providers, which is good. The list of providers that you see here is controlled by the resource groups that you have assigned to you. By default, most agency admins have any provider that falls beneath them in the provider tree. So if I'm associated with Cecil, any Cecil providers I inherently have access to. Now, some of you, it is possible, I should say, it is possible to configure resource groups so that if you do have multiple agency admins, you can kind of split this up between the agency admins so that one agency admin doesn't have access to everything. But I think, and maybe Derek can chime in here. Do you know, have you ever modified like resource groups to kind of limit provider access?
I think Interim might have some of this going on, but they would. I think they're the only ones that would have anything
Okay.
like this. Yeah.
So for most of you, if you're following along and looking at your list of providers, you'll probably see all of the different providers that fall within your agency, unless you're possibly interim. If you do have a lot of providers and you're looking for a specific provider, you can always use this provider search bar. So if I'm looking for one of my ESG projects, I can type in ESG. You see Cecil still has a lot of ESG projects. Another way that you could search is by expanding this show advanced options. And so there's a couple different things that we can do here to search. One is to limit our search options to service point users only. Some providers may have what I call like dummy providers or placeholder providers to basically for reporting or for EDA access. So if you click this box right here, you're going to limit it to the service point providers, which those are typically your providers that are actually entering data into the system. You can also search based on different levels. So how the provider tree falls, if you're looking for a certain level of provider, you can limit that. And a great example of that is down here in our provider search results. You'll see the ID and the name, and you'll also see what level that provider is. So in this case, these entitlement ESGs for homeless prevention and rapid rehousing, these fall under a placeholder provider that's just the entitlement ESG here. So if I'm only looking for the specific sites, I could refine my search to include only level 4 sites. And when I do that, I don't get any of those placeholder providers up there. So these are probably the actual sites that data services occur at. Once I find a provider that I want to modify, and the other way that you can search is the actual provider number. So I know like system admins like Derek, I could probably ask him a provider and he would probably be able to tell me the provider ID. However, most of you guys probably don't memorize all of your provider IDs. But if you do, and you know that 3551 is the Cecil entitlement ESG for homeless prevention, you can just pop this in here and execute the search that way, and it'll take you directly into that provider. You can see the back ends, the configurations of the provider. It all has that very similar feel to the front end when you're actually inputting client information. So you have like still the save button, the save and exit buttons. The tabs all probably have a very similar feel to the client record tabs. So once we are actually in here, there's a few things that we can do. One is you have your name up here, but make sure not to just like go in and change the name to like whatever you want. There's kind of a naming convention that most continuum of cares use. And so I know with you guys, you always start things with Mosby. Then you have the actual like agency, then the specific project. So I do not recommend going in and just like changing the name without consulting with your system admin or Derek. But if you wanted to add like a also known as, or if you do call this particular provider something else, so maybe Cecil entitlement ESG homeless prevention is actually the HOPE program or something, you can always pop that into the also known as. Your parent provider, this is going to show you the provider that is above this provider in your provider tree here. If you click on this, it will take you into that provider's profile. So I am not going to click on that. You have a profile image. So if you wanted to upload an image, some people like to upload like logos to their providers so that when they log in, they'll be able to see their logo up there. Completely optional. I think it's a nice touch, but doesn't really do too much. You'd be able to see when it was created and when it was last updated. And then you have a couple of configurations right here. I do not recommend touching these top changes. These are things that could have a really significant impact on your system. For example, this HUD HMIS provider, in addition to removing some of the data standards information from being viewed, it also hides that HUD verification feature when you're putting in information for the income subassessment, the disability subassessment, non-cash benefits, and health insurance subassessments. You know those little like HUD verification check marks that you have to go through, make sure that you have all of your record sets in there, and then gives you the little green check mark. If you disable this, that goes away. If you use Service Point, you're basically like locking all of your users out of the system. So you have to have this checked. So don't mess around with any of this top stuff. One thing that you can go through and make sure that it's up to date is the provider profile here. And what this does is this is just resource information about that provider. So you have a description. So if there's certain information, and a lot of times when I'm setting up a brand new community, I'll go into some of the agencies, I'll look on their websites, and whatever they have just kind of at the top in the summary about like what their agency's about, I'll throw into this description. So what is this particular CECL entitlement and ESG homeless prevention project about? We can throw that in the description. That way we have that information here. Module access settings. This is probably the one area of the provider profile that is not resource based. This actually gives us access to the different modules that exist within community services. So, and I'm not super, I don't know if you guys are familiar with all of these different modules, but Activity Point is a really cool module that allows you to track different classes or activities for your clients. So if you have, financial literacy workshops or parenting classes, things like that, you can enable Activity Point and set it up so that you can track all that information within the client's record. Call Point is typically used by like call centers or providers that take calls. It allows you to track information about callers and then connect those callers to a client record. Provider uses Client Point. Are you guys familiar with Client Point at all? See, like one, no. So Client Point is like the main area. That's where all of the client records are held. So this is something that you definitely want to make sure is checked off, because I would imagine 99% of the community uses Client Point to track their information. The eligibility module, this is an add-on to kind of the services area where you can search for providers in the community based on the client's eligibility. So if I'm looking to make a referral for client, this Yogi Bear client, I can go in there and it'll tell me which providers that client is eligible for based on the information collected about that client. So like income, demographics, health insurance, you can set it up to basically match clients to providers. The measurements tool, this is an area where it has that like Likert scale. It's a 1 to 5 measurement, and you can go through and document the client's progress through the program using that measurement tool. Shelter Point is primarily used by emergency shelters, although I have seen some communities use it for their transitional housing projects as well, but I'd say most people use it just for emergency shelters. I know those COVID motel stays, you guys set up Shelter Point to track those as well. So if your project is one that uses ShelterPoint, you would want to enable it here. And then ScanPoint. This allows you to scan clients in for services and or shelter stays. So it's a quick way to get clients those services. It works really, really well with high volume providers. So if you're like a permanent supportive housing provider where you have like one new intake every 3 months, ScanPoint's not for you. It's not worth the time getting the scan gun out, setting it up, plugging into your computer just to like check them into your thing. But if you're like a food pantry or have a food pantry component to your project and you want to track those services where you have like hundreds of people maybe coming through, you can just scan their cards and it'll track those services to the client record. So it's really cool. Now, remember, whenever you're configuring any of these module settings or anything, you're working within the specific project. So this is for this entitlement ESG homeless prevention project. What module access settings does this project need? So if homeless prevention doesn't use ShelterPoint, you probably don't need it checked, which spoiler alert, most homeless prevention projects don't use ShelterPoints. Below that, we have some location information. So this kind of jumps us back into collecting information about resources again. So this is pretty straightforward. You can add an address. You can have physical, a mailing or PO box. You can pop in your street address here. So you can pop it in the zip code. So Tampa, I know that's not Monterey, but I don't know your guys' zip codes. County area here, any landmarks, and then is this the primary address? So I'm not going to save this because this is the live site and I don't want to mess up Cecil's information. But you can see we do have a physical address here. Even if you don't plan on putting some in, make sure that to go in here and ensure that this address in here is actually up to date and accurate. All right. Below this, we have contact information. And so there's two different types of contact information that can be put in. We have the first, which is just general contact numbers. So they actually, Cecil did a great job here of like putting in just like a main number, the fax number, TDD number. So this is just kind of general information. Usually when I do trainings, I give the example of like the front desk number. So this is even better than the example I was going to give. And new numbers can be added by clicking on the little button that says add new number. You can put in the description, the number, and then indicate whether that's the primary telephone or not. You'll note that the primary telephone is bolded, so you'd be able to see that this TDD actually has that checkbox marked. The other type of contact information is going to be your contact personnel. So this is where you'll put in any information. Obviously, you know, the project manager for, you know, this Cecil ESG homeless prevention project would be good to put in here. You can always edit this information. So if we wanted to capitalize Jorge's name, we can go in and save that. You can add new contact information. So you can put in name, description, title, email address, phone number, the website address, any notes about this particular contact. And then you have a couple of check boxes down here at the bottom. One is to hide from the provider's profile. And this comes in really, really handy if you have somebody that you want to list as a contact, but you do not want that information to be shared on the actual provider profile. So if somebody's, one of the other case managers is looking through ResourcePoint and they look at this particular provider, this ESG homeless prevention, maybe they don't want Jorge's information popping up, or maybe Jorge doesn't want his information popping up. So if you check this, it'll hide it from that site. There is an optional product that we offer that actually has a like front facing, you can see Contra Costa's site here, where it actually goes through and displays information on the front end of the system. and you can actually have contact information display here. I don't think they have it. Oh, they do. So like, yeah. So this is the DCC director. If they didn't want John's information, that's where they may want to go through and just hide that information from the public profile. Are they the primary contact, and do they receive email? The other thing that this contact information will do is if you are making a referral, or if one of your users is making a referral, during that referral process, there's actually a checkbox to notify the provider via email that a referral has been made. If I'm making a referral to this provider, this entitlement ESG homeless prevention provider, and I were to check that box, it would look at the primary contact here, which is Jorge, and it would actually send him an email saying, you've received a referral through community services. Make sure to like log in and check your referral report. So that's the other thing that these contacts do. The last area below contact information is going to be this additional information. And so again, a lot of resource information. It's good to have in the system. As far as, website address, hours, program fees, you guys can kind of read the screen here. So good information here. Is there handicap access? Do you offer brochures? This show on public site, this kind of goes back to this forward-facing resource directory product, where if you don't want a provider to display at all, you can actually go through and say no to this, and it'll just not show on that resource directory site. Do you offer a printed directory? Is this a shelter? And if it is a shelter, are there any shelter requirements? All right, so lots of resource information. If you have this information in here, other users in the system, if they're using Resource Point here, 3Cs, Cecil, yeah, something like that. They can actually search for those providers. And when they pull up a provider in here, it will display that information. So it's going to show that location that was put in, our contact, those telephone numbers, and which one's the primary, services that are being provided. So there's lots of good information. But the information only displays if you actually put it into your provider admin. Okay. The other areas, if you ever wanted to see which users have access to this particular provider, so remember ESG homeless prevention, you can actually go to this provider access tab. And this is going to give you two things. The first are the users that are actually set up as this, I'm saying this wrong. It's the users where they have this provider set as their default provider. So when I first log in as Jorge, he's with Cecil, right? This agency provider. If I were to look at Cecil here, so now I'm up at that agency provider and I go to provider access, you'll see Jorge is actually set there as one of the provider users. Now, if I go to this homeless prevention one, you'll see nobody's actually set up specifically at that homeless prevention, but there's lots of users that have entered data as users. And we're going to talk about this in a bit, but EDA, it basically allows you to enter data for a specific project. So these are the users, these 6 users that have access to enter data for this entitlement ESG homeless prevention project. And this can all be managed through the user administration, which we will talk about in a little bit. So this is a great way to just kind of see that information though. All right. We're going to skip over visibility. Visibility is pretty complex. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Derek on that one. It's usually most people that I work with don't really need to know too much about visibility. So they let the system admins kind of help them set that up. So don't worry too much about that. You can get yourself into a pickle pretty quick if you go in there and mess around with it yourself. And it is super important because when you're configuring all of these different visibility settings, it's it basically dictates how information is being shared in the system. So you wouldn't want to go in, open things up or close things off, and then create issues for yourself, because it's not just your agency. It actually dictates how information shared amongst each individual project or each individual provider within your agency. So you can configure visibility to where if you enter data at this entitlement ESG homeless prevention, but then you go back up to the top of the tree, the actual agency for Cecil, you wouldn't be able to see the information that you just entered. So I definitely recommend consulting with the system admin before making any modifications to visibility. One area that you can go in though is this services tab. And so this is something that most agency admins, you'll want to go in here and make sure that you have access to the services that you need. And so when we go into the services tab, we have a couple of different areas. There's an area served area and a geography served area. This is really more kind of resource information based. So you don't have to mess around too much with this. The services provided area is also resource information. But this does play a little bit into the overall kind of functionality of the system, because when you're making a referral, and if I were to make a referral for information and referral, this provider, this ESG homeless prevention, would actually return as one of the referral search results, because it has information and referral as a service provided. What I usually recommend doing here is going through and kind of whittling this list down to where you only have your primary service. And this is actually a good example of how I probably would not set up the services provided. Does anybody offer rapid rehousing? Who has rapid rehousing in their
Housing Resource Center does.
Housing Resource Center?
Mm-hmm.
So you may be tempted to throw in like case care management. You probably work like life skills, maybe offer some financial resources to the clients that you're serving through your rapid rehousing project, right? Can I just go in and get case management from you without being enrolled in your rapid rehousing?
No, you would have to be in one of our programs.
Right. And so because that's usually how things work, you're very similar with the other, rapid rehousing projects across the country. I usually don't put that information in the primary services. Usually what I would do is I would add a service here. And so this is the homeless prevention project. So I think it's homelessness. Yeah, so homelessness prevention programs. So when you're searching through the AIRS taxonomy, there's tons of different services that exist out there. It can be kind of confusing at times, but basically you'll search for something that is similar to your project. So homelessness prevention, rapid rehousing is in here, emergency shelters in here, permanent supportive housing is in here. So all of the different project types are in here. You can pop this in, and this little PSO, this is going to be your primary service, your secondary service, your occasional service. If you put this in as your primary service and submit it, it will actually add it here. Now, this advocacy, this independent living skills instruction, some of these other ones, I would argue that these actually should be moved down as a secondary service, meaning that once I access this homeless prevention program, then I have access to advocacy. I have instruction to this, independent living skills instruction, the other services that are kind of offered here. That's usually how I set that up. If you guys all set your projects up like that, the referral system, if you guys are using it or will start using it, will just work so much better. Because then when you search for homeless prevention, you get all your homeless prevention programs. If you search for information referral, you just get your information and referral providers. You don't end up with results for a homeless prevention project as an information and referral search result. So yeah, definitely you can kind of get those strained out. This again, though, is resource information. So when you're looking at, Resource Point, or you're making a referral to one of the other providers, that's where this stuff kind of surfaces. If we scroll down a little bit further, under service settings, we have actually some configurations that can be set in this particular provider. So right now, under the service quick list, we only have education. And where this displays is if I go into, client number 1's our test client, right, Derek?
Yes.
I think so. I think it's, yeah, Chuck Norris. So when I go in, and actually let me EDA. So I'm going to EDA into my ESG homeless prevention project. It's the entitlement one. There we go. Now I'm going to search for Chuck Norris. And I go into my service transaction and I'm adding a service. This service type right here, this is the service quick list. So when I open this up, I'm only seeing education. If I need additional services here, I would want to configure that service quick list to include those additional services. So what if I'm providing some like financial assistance for this homeless prevention? Well, I don't have access to that. And I don't have any provider specific service. Well, I guess I have referrals, which that doesn't make too much sense there. So as a case manager, I'm either going to call you, my agency admin, to be like, hey, what do I do now? Or I explore this lookup here, which takes me into the AIRS taxonomy. And this AIRS taxonomy gets pretty intense pretty quickly. So now I'm searching for financial assistance. Maybe I just type in assistance. Oh my gosh, there's still so many assistants. Which one do I choose? Bus fare, Boys Girls Club. So it makes it really difficult for case managers to find the service that they're wanting. So because of that, if you know that this homeless prevention project offers more services than just education, I don't know, is Jorge on? Is Jorge with us today? Do you guys offer more services than education at Cecil? Maybe he's not there.
We offer bedding.
Bedding? Okay,
Yeah.
So there's a few other things going on. So if that is the case, what we would want to do is to go into our provider admin, find the actual specific project that we need to configure that service quick list for. So in this case, we're dealing with that entitlement ESG homeless prevention. We'll go to our services tab, because that's where we're going to modify our service pick list. And then we are going to go down to our service quick list, and we can actually add a service here. So at the homeless prevention project, I'm going to take a stab and say that you might be able to like rental, maybe payment assistance or rental deposit assistance, things like that. You can actually add this in here as one of the services. And so now if Jorge goes to this ESG homeless prevention, and he goes in and shadows, or not shadows, but goes into Chuck Norris's record, and goes to add a service, he now has the ability to select that rent and payment assistance. You want your end users selecting from this pick list. You do not want them going into the AERS taxonomy. I guarantee them going into the AERS taxonomy will end in tears. All right. So I'm going to go back in. I'm just going to undo what I did. So I don't want to actually modify this, but we'll just remove that rent payment assistance from here. So that way it's not there on the live site. All right. So that's our service quick list. This is the list that dictates that area. It also dictates the need list as well. So if you're going in and applying just needs, this is where it gets that list of services. We also have our eligibility service quick list down here. This is to be used with the eligibility module. And so I'm not quite sure if Jorge actually has that enabled for his site. Let's see. So we're going to go in. I just want to see if. Oh, it is. OK. So if you have the eligibility search enabled, you will see this little dashlet over here for this eligibility search. When you click on this, it's going to begin the process of that eligibility search. This service code quick list right here is specific to that eligibility service quick list. So all of the services that we're seeing here, so TANF, SSI, Medicare, Medicaid, CHIP programs, all of this stuff is because we have those services listed out under the eligibility service quick list. So if you guys, is anybody using this eligibility? I see one person shaking their head no.
I think only Cars uses it for right
only
now.
Cars uses it? Yeah. Okay. It's actually a pretty cool little module. Because you can say like, I want to do this. And then you can go through and continue, and it'll basically tell you like what providers the client's eligible for, potentially eligible for, or ineligible for. And so you guys don't have any providers tagged with the SSI service right now, but if you did, let me see if food stamps, I don't know, it's kind of a hard one to. Yeah, you guys don't have providers tagged with this, but if you did, it'll tell you if they're eligible for that provider, if they're potentially eligible for that provider, or they're ineligible. And then if you click on it, it'll actually tell you like why they're ineligible, or if they're potentially eligible. You can actually go through and then answer any questions that are not currently answered that would determine that eligibility. So it's a pretty cool little module, but anyways, getting a little sidetracked there. So back into the provider admin, that's what this eligibility service quick list does though. So if you're not using this, don't worry too much about this. The referral quick list. So if you're making a referral, this would be the providers that you can easily and quickly make a referral to. If you have any provider specific services, this is where that would go. So when we created our other service, we saw when I opened up the provider specific services, referrals popped up. This is why, because this referral is set right here. The other area that I definitely recommend going in and at least taking a look at is this service history display and this need history display. By default, it only has these 4 different areas, and these areas really don't provide a lot of information about the history of the services. And so with just a little bit of work, like seriously, like 30 seconds, you can actually go in here and pick out of these 33 different options, what options you want to see once you apply a service transaction. So when you're looking at the history of those services, what columns do I want to see? So maybe I want to see the provider of the service start date, maybe the cost of the service, maybe the actual service that was being provided, the service type, who created that service, if there's a funding source associated with that service. And you can actually choose up to 7 items here. After that, it gets a little too squished. So you can choose up to 7. You can reorder these in whatever order that you want. And once you do that, then if we go in, ESG homeless prevention, and we look at one of our clients and we view service history, it actually modifies these columns to display the information that we just selected. So the provider of the service start date, the cost, service type, user creating, any funding sources. So before, this area was pretty much like garbage because there was just like almost no information in there. Now it's actually somewhat usable. So if you are tracking service costs, instead of having to go into each service to see how much the cost was associated with, you could just see it right here on the display screen. So one of the things with new implementations, or if there's new providers coming on board, I always try to talk to them about this area and have it configured, because you can have it configured to your specific project. So this is for the entitlement ESG homeless prevention. All right. Any questions so far? You guys are super quiet.
Hey, Todd. Yeah, it seems like there's actually some interest about how to, if you could just show them real quick how to add services to their pick list. So when they're working with a client, they could have, like you mentioned before, have those queued up already so that, like you said, that the end user doesn't have a bad time looking at the AERS taxonomy themselves. Just go through that one more time again. Yeah,
absolutely. And so from like an end user perspective, when you go to add services here, right, you're selecting this service out of this service type field. The end user, ideally, you want them selecting from a dropdown here. That way they don't have to go into the AERS taxonomy and search for things. So you want them to just be able to open this up, select what they need, and then move on. So in order to do that, we need to find which provider that this service is associated with. So this is that CECL entitlement ESG homeless prevention. So look at what provider are you trying to enter services for. And then we're going to go back to, I'm going to get out of this service transaction. We're going to go back to our admin dashboard here. And we're going to go to our provider admin. And we're going to search for the provider that we want to modify those services for. So in this case, it's going to be that ESG homeless prevention, specifically that entitlement one. We're going to go into the provider admin area, and we're going to click on the services tab. Once we have the services tab open, we will then navigate down till we find the service quick list. This is the list of services that controls what you will see on the front end. In order to add additional services here, you can click the little button that says add services. And if you think of this as kind of like it's kind of like a sub-assessment really. So we add a service, but instead of bringing up like a list of questions, it's going to bring up that AERS taxonomy. And you as an administrator will go through the AERS taxonomy and find which service that you want. So if I want, let's say like case care management, I can search for case care management, select it. If I want brew pubs, I can go through, search for brew pubs, done. Oh, Derek marked it inactive. So, because he knows I always use it. Yeah, so if there is, I know. If there are services that the system administrator doesn't want you to use, he can actually mark them inactive to ensure that you're not actually using them. It's actually a really good practice on Derek's end. That way, nobody's actually tracking services for brew pubs. So all right, we'll do some like rent ones. Whoops, scroll too far down. So do like rent, payment, assistance. We'll do, let's see, did he do worm farms? Ha, found one. My other one, worm farms is an actual Ayers taxonomy term that exists, which is crazy to me. But anyways, so whatever you select by clicking select and you pull over into the selected service codes, when you save, those will display on the front end. If you're going through and you're unsure about what a service is, next to select, there's also a view. And if you click that, it'll actually tell you what this service does. So if you're unsure about worm farming, it's farms where earthworms are bred and raised for use as fishing bait, garden soil conditioners, yeah, and so on. So ideally you go through, way back in the day when I was a system admin, I would actually sit down with the agency admins and just kind of help them like go through this, because a lot of times they'd have questions, just to make sure that you guys are getting the right service in. So this list of selected service codes, when I click submit, it will add it here. If I want to remove one of these services, I can always remove it. So maybe I don't want worm farming. I can always remove it by clicking the little red circle with a minus in it. I'll remove it from our service quick list. But this service quick list in the provider admin dictates what you'll actually see on the front end. So when I go into Chuck Norris's record, I go to service transactions, I add a service, and I go down to service type. These three are in here because I added them into my service quick list. So the end user isn't going to see that back end, your case managers are not going to see that back end. So it's really up to you guys to make sure that you have the right services here that you're wanting to track for your project. If you do not have the services here, I promise you your case managers will select something really weird like worm farming or brew pubs or something, and your reporting will be terrible. All right, so I'm going to bail on this service. We're going to go back into our provider admin area. We're going to go back into this ESG homeless prevention. And I think that's pretty much it. So the two, I would say, main areas are the service quick list. Make sure that this is set up correctly. I'm actually going to remove the case care management and the rent payment assistance, just because I don't want to affect Cecil's project. And then I would say definitely look at the service history display. This just makes the system a lot more user-friendly for your end users, for your case managers. So think about what, in this case, what this homeless prevention project usually looks at, and then have that information displayed. If you need to track cost of service or whoever's creating it or notes about that service, make sure it's displayed here in this history display. That way, yeah, it's there and it's ready to go. All right. And feel free, if you guys have any questions, definitely, throw them in the chat as well. So I do have that open so I can see. All right. Whoops, that's the wrong thing. That's some Java code right there. I was pulling up the little agenda Derek gave me. There it is. All right. What else do we need to go through other than that? So as far as, Oh, display settings. Is that something that was on the agenda? Let's see. I'm skipping all around, Derek, as you can tell.
Display settings.
I don't think that actually was.
Check.
Display
No,
default
maybe
screen. Yeah.
maybe some light touch shelter point settings. Just if you needed to update some
The beds.
lists.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah. So for the users that are using ShelterPoint, make sure, one, that the provider that you have here has the ShelterPoint module enabled for them. So that's going to be module access settings. Just make sure that it's enabled. If you're already using ShelterPoint, there's a very good chance that this is already enabled for that particular provider. So if you need to modify your bed unit inventory list, you can do that through your module settings. And I always think of the module settings as all of these different areas, all of these different modules here. This is where you can really kind of do more of a deep dive into those different modules. So if we are trying to configure the ShelterPoint module settings, we're going to want to click on ShelterPoint module settings. Once you do that, you have 3 different tabs. The first one is going to be the shelter information. This displays your service code for when a shelter stay is applied. So if I check somebody into the entitlement ESG homeless prevention shelter, it will actually tag the shelter stay with an emergency shelter code. Now, again, this is kind of weird because you wouldn't want to do this for homeless prevention, but so yeah, make sure that that code's right. If you are one of those communities that uses like ShelterPoint, or one of those providers that uses ShelterPoint for like transitional housing or permanent supportive housing, just make sure that you have the right code there. You do have some configuration options in here as well. So one is you can display referral notifications for outstanding referrals. So when you open up your shelter list, if you want to see a little kind of pop-up come up saying, hey, you have some outstanding referrals, you could enable this. There are different fields that you can also enable to be displayed as part of that ShelterPoint check-in. And so you can see all of those different fields right here. You can also require checkout fields. Most of them are pretty straightforward, like the ROI, managing households, any incidents. So if you want to see those, make sure that you have yes marked. Otherwise, click no. This entry exit, by checking yes to this, this will actually automatically apply an entry exit record set to the client's record when you check them into ShelterPoint. So you check a client into ShelterPoint, and then you guys go back over to Client Point. On the entry exit tab, you'll see an entry that corresponds with that shelter check-in. So most providers are set up to have that happen. Some night by night shelters maybe aren't set up that way, but I'd say the majority of shelters are set up to make that happen. So anyways, different options there. Unit list. This is where you actually control how the beds are being built out. And I'm going to see if I can find a provider. Does Cecil, do you know if Cecil has a shelter?
I don't think so.
What about this guy right here? ShelterPoint, any unit list? No, okay. Is there, which provider, which one of you guys has ES that we can look at? Nobody operates emergency shelter in Monterey? Or nobody on the call operates emergency shelter?
Community Homeless Solutions does.
Community Homeless Solutions.
Community Homeless Solutions does.
Wonderful.
Community Human Services does as well.
Oh, I'm community. All right, perfect. Because that's actually what I selected then. All right, so if we go into our provider admin and we search for our thing for community human services, do we know what that is called? We have outreach,
It's the Safe Place Shelter.
safe place. Okay.
Oh, it's the
So
other.
the safe place.
This is the resource one. It's the other.
Oops.
Yeah, Safe Place Shelter 3466.
34. All right, perfect. And it's actually an emergency shelter, not a safe haven. All right. So for this safe place shelter, we'll go through. You can see that they have shelter point modules settings here as well. And that's because they have it enabled in their provider profile here. So we'll go through shelter point module settings. We'll go over to our unit list. And you can see that they have it as the warming shelter. So currently, there are 12 units that are built out in the system here. And if we open this up, so if we click the little edit pencil next to this unit list, it's actually going to show us basically the structure of that build. So here's our data down here. We have a main floor. And then underneath this main floor, we have male and female beds, or I guess rooms. And underneath these, we have the specific beds. So there's female, and then there's 6 beds. Then there's male, and then there's 6 beds. If we needed to add a bed here, I could go into one of these, and I could enter the number of beds that I want to add. So if I want to add 1 bed, and then I could click add new unit. And what this would do is it's going to add a 7th bed here. You could rename these. So I have some people where they'll go through and they'll have very specific numbers on the beds and everything. You could do that way. Same with your actual, floors and everything. So if you had like a building and then a floor, so there's lots of flexibility on how you can build this out. But we'll just name this like the test bed. That way I can easily identify it and go back and delete it. So yeah, you can add beds there. If you did want to add a new room, you could always add a new room here. So this would be like male, female. Maybe you wanted to do like a transgender. You could pop that in there as a new room. If you wanted to add a new floor, you could always add a new floor as well. So maybe this warming shelter, they're going to build up and they're going to have a 2nd floor. Well, we can add that 2nd floor on here and then put beds underneath that. So where does this display? Once we add our beds here and we go out, and this is the safe place shelter. We can go to shelter point. We can select our safe place shelter. And this is going to have client data, probably. Do you guys have people checked in?
I'm
going to go to PS site. This will work better. Chaz, that's one of the areas because you'll be able to see the beds. Yeah, let's see if I can find something real quick. My emergency shelter. So when you submit it though, you'll have this this list, and the beds that you actually see when you go to check a client in, this is where, so this is going to be that first level. So this could be the floor, it could be building, that 2nd level, and then the actual rooms. So if I needed to add something different here, so if I needed to add a new room, I would want to go under this provider, this Tyler's Emergency Shelter. Which is right there. I would go to my module settings. I would go to shelter point, and I would modify this unit list. And so it's under Tyler's Emergency Shelter. I have a lot of other stuff going on here, but basically if I wanted to add something under Hope Hall, I have the blue floor, the green floor. If I want to add another bed or another 10 beds, I could add another 10 units. And so now I have 13 units under this blue floor. So when I look at shelter point and I go into Tyler's emergency shelter and I select my emergency shelter, I now have under the blue floor an additional 10 beds. So this is where you can add those additional beds. And then you can check people in as you normally would. This overflow bed is always going to be there. As soon as you fill that overflow bed, it'll actually just generate another overflow bed to put another client in. So it's this like never ending overflow bed that occurs. So yeah, without going into one of your actual shelters, again, your Safeway shelter, module settings tab here. And then you're going to go into your shelter point module settings, and under unit list, this is where you can modify what beds are available in shelter point. So I think one of the reasons, right, Derek, that you had me do this was with some of the COVID beds, those motel beds, there'd be beds that basically came online as that project kind of progressed. And so people were contacting you to add them. But really, you guys can just go in, find, the area that you want to add the new bed to, and just add that bed there. You can also remove beds. Note that if you remove a bed that a client is currently enrolled in, that the bed will still display on the front end of the system until that client's exited from that bed, and then that bed will disappear. So module settings, shelter point module settings, and then you can modify your unit list. Did you guys want to take a quick bio break / get some more water break? Or maybe coffee for you guys? I know it's 1 o'clock for me, but I know it's early still.
Yeah, I think that would be good. Maybe come back in 5 minutes or so.
Yeah, that sounds good. And then we'll roll into some of the user admin responsibilities.
Yep, that sounds great.
All right, reconvene in 5.
All right.
It'll be a long day, guys. Long day. But here, it's fucking cold. There goes my $200 PG&E again. I have a friend who's coming to look at the flickering of the light in the sala. So I need this on screen by 4 o'clock, ladies. 4 o'clock. Here's open up.
All right, is everybody back? Ready to rock and roll?
Cholula's gone?
I'm ready.
Bitch.
You're always ready to rock and roll, Derek. All right, we'll chop back into it then. So I did want to talk a little bit about the other areas on the admin dashboard. So the first one, other than provider admin, is going to be your provider groups. This is an area where you can configure a couple of different things. And so if we click on provider groups, we can see that this controls visibility groups, which you guys don't have to worry about, reporting groups, and EDA groups. And so with reporting groups and EDA groups, these are things that can make your life just a little bit easier. Reporting groups allow you to actually go through and group multiple providers into one of these reporting groups. And so you can search and see, so community human services, so I'm still shadowing Andrew. They have this community human services ESG group. And if we look at this, it actually is composed of these different RIE projects, which makes no sense. But so you have this ESG group that has this RIE project in there. this RIDE project, and then the Safe Place Shelter. So this allows you to run this reporting group, and it's going to run it for data for all 3 of these projects. So if you do have, reporting needs where you need to report out all of your rapid rehousing programs, or all of your SSVF programs, or all of your ESG programs all as one, this would be the ideal way to do it, because you can just select which providers you want to group together. And then we get to the report side of things, and let's say it's the APR. Instead of choosing a specific provider, you use the reporting group, find your reporting group here, and run it that way. And it's running it for multiple providers at once. So very, very handy reporting groups. Enter data as groups, or EDA groups, are very similar in that you group multiple providers together. Now, these EDA groups can be used when you are modifying your user profiles. So that's a pretty good segue into that. So let's talk a little bit about user admin, and then I'll kind of come back to this, this EDA provider group. User admin. By going to this user admin area, it gives you the option to search for various users within your organization. So if I just do like a random search, you're going to see that I have 12 users that pop up, and they're all associated with community human services. So some of them are agency admins, some of them are case manager 2s. Up at the top, we have the ability to execute a search based on active users, or we can execute a search based on inactive users, which there are none right now. If you need to modify somebody's profile, so maybe their email address has changed, their phone number has changed, their title has changed, you can go into the user account by clicking on the little pencil, or by clicking on their user name here. So we'll pick on Sean for a little bit, since I see him on my screen. You'll see that each user has their own unique ID. This is similar to like the client ID. It's automatically assigned when the user profile is created. The provider that they're associated with, this is the default provider that's associated. So this is when Sean logs in to the system, this is what he sees up here. You can see name, title, email, telephone. This is all information that can be modified. So if this information changes at all, they can go in, or you can go in and modify this. Username, and then your password. There is a password set feature. So if somebody does have trouble logging in, which I'm sure never happens in your community, but if they were to have trouble logging in, they could use that forgot password feature, and it would use the email on file, and it would basically prompt them to go in and reset that password. If the email on file doesn't work though, then that whole situation doesn't work. So sometimes case managers or end users will contact either Derek or the agency admin to reset their password. You do have the ability as an agency admin to reset passwords for users within your agency. This is something that I encourage you all to have your end users do, is to contact you guys first. There is only one of Derek, and sometimes he has other things to do rather than just resetting passwords. So as awesome as Derek is, it's probably a quicker route if your case managers contact you first, see if you can, do the password, and then if that doesn't work or you're unavailable or anything, then reach out to Derek to reset the password, or reach out to the help desk to reset the password. If you want to reset the password though, it's pretty straightforward. Down here under the consecutive bad logins, you'll see how many times they've basically attempted to log in. Once they hit 3 times, they will lock themselves out of the system. You could just click reset here, and it will give them another three times to log into the system. Most users, though, when they lock themselves out, it's because they have no idea what their password is. So usually what I will do is I will actually generate a password for them. So a new temporary password. I'm not going to do this, Sean. I can't see you, but I know you're getting a little nervous. But if you click this generate password, it will give you a random password. You can actually make your own password too if you don't like the random password that it gives you. So a lot of times I'll click generate password, and then I'll just remove the like numbers and letters that they give me, and I'll put something a little bit more user friendly, like like Wednesday 24 or something. That way it's easy for them to type in. As the user continues to lock themselves out more and more, I usually get meaner and meaner with my passwords, or it's like, you should really remember your password 2021, and so on. But yeah, send them a password, save it, and then you can shoot it off, and they should be able to log in. Just be aware that when you generate a new password, you're actually generating a temporary password. So when they go to log in, it will prompt them to reset that password to the password of their choosing. The other thing that occasionally happens is users will contact you and they'll say, I can't log into the system. What's going on? And you come into this user information area and they have 0 bad consecutive logins. There's 2 things that always happen with this. One is their username is incorrect. So whatever username that you have set up in their user profile, that's the one that they need to use. If there's multiple S Stones, sometimes it's like S Stone 2. So make sure that they have their username. So I always send that to them again, and then make sure that they have the right URL. You guys are not the only ones that use community services or Service Point. There's lots and lots of different communities across the country that use this software. So if you just Google community services or WellSky, Service Point, or whatever it may be, chances are you're not going to find the Mosby site at the top of the list. So usually I'll just kind of like, hey, are you sure you're on the right URL? And make sure that you use this username. That usually does the trick for them. And if it doesn't, that's maybe when you can reach out to Derek. Down below here, one other thing that you can do from here is there's a status for this user. So if a user leaves your organization, I recommend going in right away as soon as you find out and inactivating their user profile. By inactivating the user profile, this will prevent them from logging into the system. So yeah, that's somebody that doesn't work at your agency. You do not want them to have access to the system so that they're entering data, modifying data, all of that stuff, deleting data maybe, without actually working there. So go in right away, inactivate them, then contact your system administrator or Derek, and let them know that that user is no longer there. And he can kind of guide you as far as maybe deleting the user, or he can go in and remove the user and free up that user license for you. So, or if somebody's going like on vacation, so let's say, Christina is heading out, she's going on a nice long cruise for a couple weeks. You can always inactivate her to make sure that she's not working and she's enjoying her vacation time rather than entering data into community services. All right, we'll keep Sean active for now, I guess. Down another area that I do want to just kind of briefly talk about is the settings and special permissions. This is where you can give users access to, you guessed it, settings and special permissions. So if there are different modules that your provider has access to, and you want your user to also access those modules, this is the area where you can give them access to those different modules. Be aware though, that the settings and special permissions, it kind of pulls off this initial default provider that the user is associated with. So in order for this user to use, let's say, ShelterPoint, this provider needs to have ShelterPoint enabled. Once that happens though, if we want, Sean here to use, ScanPoint or the measurements tab, we can enable this setting here. And now if Sean were to go into a client record, once I save, I guess, he would actually see the measurements tab pop up in that client record, and he would be able to do measurements on that client. So lots of different stuff, client point, call point. If you want them to edit or create incidents, you can do that. ShelterPoint. You also have some options for backdating the release of information, as well as just using backdate mode in general. So if that's something that you want your users to be able to do, make sure you have those settings enabled. I will say I would caution against using backdate mode too much. Data should be entered in a timely manner. I'm sure Derek has told you this many, many times before, but you should be entering data as close to real time as possible. If you do not, it actually is tracked in a lot of the reporting. So like if you ever look at your APR or CAPR, there's what's called data timeliness. It measures the date between the entry date and the date that you actually put this information in the system, calculates that, and it reports it out on the APR and your CAPR. So I always try to discourage end users from using backdate mode too much because it means they're entering data late. So don't do that. You can allow them to change the visibility of the client assessments. Don't mess with that one too much. Don't mess around with the mass visibility update. This is all visibility stuff. If you do have a solid understanding of visibility, then talk with Derek and maybe he can set you up to allow end users to do that. But for the most part, don't mess around with the visibility stuff. Scan point, measurements, activity point. You can allow users to manage only unnamed clients. This is something that you don't want to do because it only allows them to add clients unnamed. So you can't put a name in, which usually just kind of destroys your data quality. And then allow the user to tab to goal links within the assessments. This is something I actually think this setting is broken because I think it's always on. It's that little G next to all your assessment questions. It allows you to set a quick goal. All right. So that's pretty much it for your kind of setting up users. You could create new users. You can add a new user and use the pool of license that you're assigned for that. With adding new users though, you definitely want to make sure that you're in communication with Derek about that because there's lots of documents that need to be signed. There's probably training that needs to be complete before users should have access to the live site. So, so definitely contact your system admin. One other thing. So when you are adding a new user and you're setting them up, so you have the settings and special permissions, you have license down here that you can assign. Up at the top, you have a tab for your enter data as groups or your EDA groups. This is one of the really important tabs because this is how you give your end users access to enter data for various projects. So if I go into this EDA groups, you can see right here that I think I'm still with Sean. Yeah, someone whose record? Yeah, still with Sean. Sean has access to the community human services and all of the children included. So what this means is he has access to this provider, the CHS, and any subordinate provider off of that. So that's what children included means. It has nothing to do with household composition. It's just provider tree structure in the system. So basically, Sean has access to all of the projects that CHS has. In addition to that, he also has access to this CARS project. And so what this translates to right here is if I were to shadow Sean, and I click my EDA group, I have access to all of the CHS providers, including these resource ones and these inactive ones, and that Mosby CARS project. And that is because in here, when I look at Sean's EDA groups, that's what we've assigned to him. If I were to remove Mosby cars, guess what? I save and exit. When Sean goes into EDA, it takes a second. One thing that you can do though is if you you hit like Control F5, it'll reload and it'll kind of refresh the data. That's what I usually do because I'm impatient. Reload data, Shadow Sean, and this usually does the trick. Notice he no longer has access to Mosby cars. We've taken it away. And Sean, for a mere $20, I can give you access back. I'm just joking. I'll give you access back. So go in here, we'll find his user, EDA. We can go in, add a group. We can search for Mosby cars. Now, one thing is it's not going to show up because Sean actually doesn't have Mosby cars as one of his resource groups. So this is something that actually needs to be done. If you're assigning providers outside of the providers that you have access to, you need to contact your system admin. So I can go in here, find Sean, and we can search for Mosby cars. The archive. So now he's back to normal. One other thing that is kind of nice is you can actually use those provider groups, those EDA provider groups in here. So a lot of agency admins will just go in and they'll do this children included. And you'll notice that when we shadow Sean here, he has access to these resource providers here and ZZ. Does anybody else ever see this stuff on their EDA list? Resource providers, ZZ, Z inactive.
Yes, HRC has a few of those too.
Yes. So the reason that is because you're actually grabbing all of the providers underneath that tree. So if we were to look into our admin, into our, in this case, our probably like level 2 provider here. So this community human solutions services. And you guys don't really, there is a provider tree that you can look at, but basically any provider that falls underneath this, including, see these resource providers here, they all get pulled into his EDA access. So one thing that we could do, and I like doing this with new providers, is going in and creating a provider group, an EDA group. Let's see if there's any in there. There's not, so we'll create a new EDA group. And we'll say this is the CHS active providers. We're gonna make it local so that this provider has access to it. And then when we save it, the group of providers that we define here will actually be part of this group. So we can go in and manage the providers. Notice that he has access to all of these different providers here. And so we can go through and say, we want this one, we want this one, Elm Street, some of our RAI projects. I'm guessing this is going to hit all our RAI projects there. Safe Passage, Safe Place Shelter, that one. But we don't want these resource groups, right? And we don't want these ZZs. So we're just going to leave those out and we're going to stick with these ones right here. And so now when I save this, what I can do is I can actually go back into my user admin, search for Sean. And instead of using this children included, I can actually go through and search for that CHS active providers here, put this one in, and then remove this one. Now, does anybody have any idea what this would do other than Derek? So this group is made up of these providers, right? And because that's assigned to Sean here, as well as cars as a separate one, when he goes into EDA, I need to, takes a second. So let's do this little reload action. Don't save your passwords. It's very, very bad. So when he goes into EDA now, guess what? He doesn't have those ZZZ providers. He doesn't have those resource providers. He only has providers that are currently active. If a new provider, nice, Derek. I like the little graphics. Woo! If a new provider comes on, in order to give him access to that new provider, I don't need to go back into his, user admin and add that provider. I can simply go to this provider group, search for the existing provider. What is CHS? Search for that existing provider group and just add that provider in there. So EDA group, search for that CHS provider, and then just add it in here. And the nice thing about adding it in here is any user that this CHS active providers is assigned to, it will automatically add that provider and give them EDA access. If Elm Street goes offline for some reason, we don't anticipate that, but if for some reason it goes offline, we can always remove it from this list, and it's going to remove that from that EDA access to any user that this CHS active providers is assigned to. So it's a little more setup right in the beginning, but down the line, it definitely pays dividends. So see. Yeah, people sometimes forget their passwords. So looks like Sean's one of those guys. Yeah, the bad thing though is you can't reset your own password. So you would have to, you guys would probably still have to contact Derek, or if you do have another agency admin, that's available. So I think with CHS, there's Andrew in there as well. So yeah, that's one way to do it. All right, I know we're starting to get a long time, so I felt like we went a little through too much through admin stuff. But yeah, that's user admin is a good way. Provider groups is wonderful to do that. So let's talk about I guess some reporting. Are you guys pretty familiar with the different reports that are out there? I'm guessing probably yes. You're the agency admins. If you're not, make sure you familiarize yourself with the various reports. Definitely focus in on the different funding sources and reporting out to your funders. If you have any HUD, COC, or ESG funds, get super familiar with the COC APR, the ESG CAPR. If you operate like SSVF, make sure you get familiar with the SSVF data quality and the export. If you're any path people out there, run the path report, make sure that you understand what's going on with that. A lot of this reports have some built-in data quality things. So if I'm running, and this is where we kind of need to go over because we're going to see client data. So I'm going to just pop over to the PS training site. If you are running your reports, you can, name it something. So Tyler's APR. And this is just the name that it shows up here. Your provider type, you can select either the specific provider. So if I know I want just this project, I can run it for just this project. If I do want to create a reporting provider group, I can use a reporting group and then search for the various reporting groups here. So I'll just do it for one provider. There's barely any data in our professional services training site. But I'm sure I can probably get a couple clients in here if I go back far enough. So your provider or your date range, you can also run it for a provider and include any subordinate providers. So this would include any providers that fall beneath that top provider in the tree. Some provider trees are actually set up to have those placeholder providers. We actually saw that earlier with the Cecil Entitlement ESG. There's just a Cecil Entitlement ESG provider. And then beneath that, we had the rapid rehousing and the homeless prevention. And that allows you to run it for that basically placeholder provider and grab the subordinates, and it grabs both of them. For me, it just makes sense to handle that via reporting groups. I think it's just an easier way to handle it. Then you don't have an extra provider that's just kind of floating out there, but it can be helpful. So select your provider, your date range. This is entry exit based reporting. The APR and the CAPR are at least. So when you think about this program date range, it's going to grab any client that was enrolled during this reporting period. So if you have a client that went into your project in 1965 and is still enrolled during this date frame, that client will still report or be pulled into this report. Likewise, if you have somebody that exited during this reporting date frame, as long as they were in it, they will get pulled into the report. So I always think like start date, end date. If the client overlaps in any way between that start and end date, they will get pulled into entry exit based reporting. And then we have our entry exit types. This typically relates to the funding sources for your specific project. So for the rapid rehousing, I think I'm a HUD funded project. If you're unsure, you can always contact, the COC lead. I'm sure they can probably tell you what kind of funding you get. Although I would argue as agency admins, you should probably know what funding you have for your projects. You can always just run it for everything. Sometimes it's actually nice to run it for everything except for what you think your funding is, because then you'll find out if one of your case managers is entering in under like VA or HPRP or something crazy like that. So we're just going to run it for everything. You can build your report. What it's going to do is it's going to run up here. If you're impatient, you can just keep clicking refresh over and over again until it says complete. Once it says complete, you can then click the little magnifying glass to view that report. It's going to give you your project, some of the organization identifier information. So project IDs, your method for tracking ES, COC codes, geocodes, is it a victim service provider, all of that good stuff. You have your report validation table here. So this is, again, a lot of aggregated information. This APR will align exactly with what you need to submit to Sage. So it should be in a format where you can just pop it in there. But it also has just a lot of good information. Now, when are your APRs due? Do you have to submit one every week, every month? I'm hoping somebody says every year, right? Okay, so does that mean you run your APR right before it's due? Some of you are probably like, yeah, that's exactly what I do. I just wait till like the day before, I run it, I find a bunch of errors, and then I contact Derek, and we're up to like 2 in the morning trying to correct data issues. I always think of it as, and I gave this example way back. Does anybody here brush their teeth on a regular basis? Nobody? Derek. So I have one person, two people. There's a few people, right? Why do you do that, Derek? Why do you brush your teeth on a regular basis?
I think 4 out of 5 dentists recommend that you brush your teeth on a daily basis.
It's a maintenance thing, right? You don't just wait till you go to the dentist every 6 months and have them clean your teeth. You want to maintain those teeth along the way. Think of reporting like that. You don't want to wait until your APR is due the next day and have to go through and fix all sorts of data. So definitely make sure that you're running these on a consistent basis. I think most communities, like running an APR on a monthly basis is pretty standard practice. But if you have a lot of people going in and out of your project, maybe run it more often, run it on a weekly basis to just make sure things are okay. And if something's not okay, if you're getting a lot of information missing, errors, things like that, then you can address them sooner rather than spending like 2 terrible weeks right before your APR is due trying to fix everything. The APR is how you communicate what you're doing in your program with HUD. So you submit it, and it's basically how you're telling them what you're doing with the clients, right? And how your data quality is looking and all of that. So if you submit, you know, just APR with terrible data quality and that's inaccurate, that's what's going to be reported to your funder. And if I was a funder and I saw that, you know, there was a ton of information missing and not all the clients that you serve were getting entered, you can tell me that, but if the report doesn't say that, I'm not going to fund you. So make sure that you're maintaining this information along the way. And so, you know, right down here, you know how many people are usually in your programs. Make sure this number lines up with that. You should have a rough idea of like, you know, how many people have left, how many people are still currently enrolled in your project. Look at these data quality areas. Information missing, that's the first thing you want to target. If you have information missing, that's a very, very bad thing. This should be all zeros. Now, once you get past that, then you can kind of look at this client doesn't know, client refused. These are things where sometimes the client doesn't know or the client refuses to give you that information. There are certain thresholds that I know like HUD finds acceptable, but if 100% of the clients coming into your program don't know their name or don't know their date of birth, there's usually something wrong with your data collection process. So information missing, that should be zeros. Client doesn't know, client doesn't refuse, that should probably be below like 4 or 5% rate of error. Universal data elements, again, this stuff should be super low. This is stuff that you should be able to knock out and get down to zeros. And I think Derek and I had looked at some data quality for Monterey. And to your credit, I think you guys mostly do like a really great job for data quality. But the idea is to make sure that that you don't have any errors, that there's zero information missing. So yeah, data quality, timeliness. This is where you're seeing the time that it takes to enter data. This one's a little bit tougher because this really relies on you guys, how you build out your intake process and everything. So are you collecting it on paper and then putting it into a file and then some data entry person picks it up and enters it a week later? Well, if that's your standard process, then you know you're always going to be 7 to 10 days or 11 plus days on your timeliness, which is going to make your project look bad. So that's where you guys as agency admins, as the project managers, should be trying to modify the data entry flow so that you're getting it as close to real time as possible. Back before I was a system admin, I was actually a project manager for PSH, and we did exactly that. We would collect it on paper. And after seeing some of the reports, like we need to change the way that we intake clients. And so we worked to where it was when the client intake was being done, information was going directly into the computer. And that significantly increased our timeliness, because if clients coming into the project, we're getting their information. If we don't have time to get their information, we don't have time to do an intake that day. Yeah, so in just a lot of good information with APRs. I guess I know we're getting kind of low on time. So are there areas of reporting that you guys want me to focus on, or areas that are giving you guys trouble? I guess one thing to just be aware of when you're looking at entry exit based reporting is the information. Most of the information that you're collecting is going to be at the time of entry. So when you see like residence prior and relationship to head of household, those are based on your basically the entry record set. So for each record, so to give an idea, client here. So like Yogi Bear is one of our clients that's enrolled in here. So if we search for Yogi Bear, I always do this. I always type the name into the ID number. So there's Yogi Bear. And so if he's going into the emergency shelter, it's actually looking at the data way back in 2017. And so if I run an APR for Tyler's emergency shelter for that overlap this date range, it's actually going to look at some of the information that was collected at the time of entry, and that was not set up correctly. If I'm looking at this permanent supportive housing in 2018, it's going to look at the information that was collected at the time here, and it's going to report that out on the APR. So if I'm missing data like client location stuff, it's not because it's missing as of 3/24/2021. It's probably missing because of at the time of entry, that information wasn't collected about the client. So keep that in mind as you run some of these reports here. Income. So another thing I think that gets people is sometimes there's like income errors and whatnot. Make sure that you guys are doing your interim reviews and your annual assessments. The annual assessments are required for any project where a client is in there over a year. And you want to make sure that that annual assessment, here, just make sure you guys know what I'm talking about. So for the entry exit, that annual assessment that you guys are doing, it's going to be basically a year from the project start date. So it's going to be on a yearly basis, an annual basis, which makes sense why they call it an annual assessment. And then you have a window that is 30 days before that annual assessment to complete the update. And this should be done to, one, just update the client record. So if their income has changed or something has changed, like you want to make sure that you're capturing that. But even if nothing has changed, you still want to create one of these annual assessments to say to HUD that you've actually completed it. And this stuff all kind of ties back to your HMIS data standards. So there is a document. Is anybody familiar with the HMIS data standards? So let's see. Sure, I have it very close by. Looks kind of like this. This tells you how to enter data. It goes through all the information that's required to be entered, why you're entering it, how to enter it, what the valid responses are for the fields. It talks in depth about street outreach and coordinated entry and offers data collection guidance on those types of projects. If there's any specific funding, so you get HOPWA, PATH, RIE, VA funding, it's going to go and walk you through those data elements as well. So this is something that, although it's 232 pages, you probably aren't going to memorize, but have that HMIS data standards document close by. So if you do ever have any questions, you can just reference that. All right, what questions do you guys have? I want to make sure we leave enough time to kind of get to what you want to hear about.
And Tyler, I think we can actually spare, if you can spare a little bit more time, we can maybe go 10, 15 minutes into the next hour here. Because I think it's just really valuable to have you here. And a lot of the policies and procedures and stuff I'll be going over, the policy will stay the same. The procedure might be changing a little bit because we're actually overhauling our website. So I think it'd be appropriate to have a second agency admin training for policies and procedures at a later time to reflect those changes to our website. It'll make a lot of things a lot easier because we're getting a portal and everything. So we'll have let's have Tyler here for a little bit longer if you have specific questions. And just to kind of clarify, the expectation is that the agency admins will be able to resolve a lot of end user questions before having to come to me. So, if there are questions that you're getting a lot as agency admins and you don't know how to fix it, or if there's something in your case manager's workflow that you don't quite understand, now's a really good time to kind of ask, like, hey, how do I add family members to the middle of a shelter stay? Or, hey, I keep getting head of household errors on my APR. How do I fix that? Yeah, so let's give it a little bit more time here.
And if you're shy, you can always submit comments in the chat, or questions in the chat, I should say. And as we wait, I will say, you know, I've worked with, oh, does somebody have something? Somebody saying something?
Over to HR, but
Hi guys, it's Ivan from Step Up. How are you?
Hi, Ivan. I'm doing good.
Sorry, I'm like on 2 different calls today. I
No
was
worries.
double booked. I have a question in regards to the APRs. So
Okay.
I don't know if this, and this is something I already worked out with Derek, but since you're like the main person, I wanted to just double check if with the APRs right now, the city of Salinas and Monterey, because I'm with Step Up Project Home Key. So we have to submit to the state monthly APRs. It's like a monthly report that they're requesting every month. So the only way that I can do that, from what Derek was letting me know, is that because typically when you do the APR and you upload it into Sage and you normally get the APR CSV file, but since they're really not requesting the CSV file and just really more of the PDF. So really the only thing I really have been doing that Derek has instructed me is like kind of just printing the page and saving it as a PDF. Is that like the only way that currently we can only do how to save that format of an APR into like, is there another way of doing it, or is it just that way of just hitting print? Because I know that sometimes when you run multiple, it just shows all of the files.
Yeah,
files,
because when you download it, it actually downloads it into the CSV file. This is what you're talking about.
Right. But then like
which
when you
is
try
not
to,
the most user friendly. Yeah.
Right. And then when you try to go into like when you try to go into the overview, like when you go back into the reports,
Yes.
and it'll show you like all the reports that you have attempted, like right on top. It'll show like all of the reports that you've either you fixed some stuff or you've done some edits, X, Y, and Z. And I just don't know if that's okay, like when we're sending it to the state, or it doesn't even matter. Like this is the first time, I mean, we've used Service Point over here in Santa Monica, but this is like the first time we're using Service Point out there. But this is the first time I'm actually getting updates on a monthly basis that we have to provide. So I'm just like wondering if that's like just the best way of doing it. Since they are asking for basically all of the information that's in an APR.
Gotcha. Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have like a really good way to print this off, because the APR is designed to be uploaded into Sage, and it needs it in that CSV file and everything for the upload. I think that's a great feature enhancement request, because pretty much every other area in the system, you have this like little print button, or if you're looking to print, basically anything off, you always have like, the print options here. Or,
right. Yeah.
And you're right in that the APR does not have that one button. That seems to be pretty much everywhere else in community services. So,
well, I mean, by default, that's typically, I mean, when you do an APR, you normally don't run a PDF, report.
yeah.
And then this is just like a unique situation with like the county of Monterey and with the city and what they're requesting from us. And this is basically what I'm giving them every month. And I'm just wondering, I mean, I haven't got a pushback from them. But you know, it just showed, like, my only thing was like, is you're showing like all of the attempts, because you know you want to make sure the data is correct and you want to make sure that everything is there. So it'll just show like a huge list of all the attempts that you tried to run the report.
Yeah.
But cool, no
Yeah, and
worries.
I don't know if, you know, I think it's a good thing that you're, or what, how I think, I'm not quite sure how the city would feel about it, but I think it's a good thing that you're wanting to make sure that the data is, you know, accurate and correct and everything. And, you know, end users, case managers sometimes make mistakes with data entry. I think it's a normal process. I don't think there's any community that has, you know, perfect data quality and right from the get-go. So yeah, I don't know. I see it as, you know, I think it's a good thing that you're
Alrighty, no
caring
worries.
enough. You're not just submitting garbage to
Right.
them. So
When I'm like, no, the information is correct. I might have read it a few times.
yeah.
Alrighty, that's all I had.
One thing you can do, because I imagine the city and the county might not be wanting all the fields in this report. So if you go all the way down, Tyler, I think they're like 40 or 50 different fields. If you know they're only asking for information in field 5A, you could actually just kind of make a little Excel or something and just copy and paste the corresponding CSV field to your Excel, and that might be a little bit more presentable because they
Got it.
yeah, if that's what they're
Like
asking
take
for.
out what they need, basically.
Yeah, and that's something I've done in the past, is just if they're only asking for the majority of funders like this are only asking for 5A and then maybe exit destination and prior living. So 3 of the 20 or so odd fields here.
Gotcha. Okay. Thanks, Eric.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, the APR does ask for a lot of stuff. Who's next?
I'll ask a question. I think I already know the answer, but you know, since we're here and everyone's rushing to share their question, I thought maybe I'll squeeze in there. So when I pull the APR, so sometimes I pull the APR and I'm trying to, you know, confirm we have our own data sheets, right, for all of our clients, and trying to compare to make sure that our data is equal. And I notice that it'll show exit destinations for our clients, and that's how I can look to see, you know, clients that we've put into housing, you know, that the exit destinations match. But does the APR at all, like if we do an interim for housing somebody, will the APR at any place show if we've housed somebody but they're not closed yet? Or will it just show those who have closed and their exit destinations? Because sometimes we show like how many people we currently have housed for our fiscal year, but it may not necessarily match with the exit destinations because they could still be in our program.
Right. Yeah. So a lot of times with, you know, PSH and especially rapid rehousing, you have clients that you're working with, and then they're housed, but they're still in the project for a while afterwards. And so I don't think the APR would show that information. But how you track who is housed versus unhoused is there's that housing move-in date field.
Right.
And so usually you do an interim review and you populate
Right.
that. So for a lot of like, when you look at like point in time reporting and things like that, that's actually the determining factor whether somebody is experiencing homelessness still or they're actually stably housed, or housed, I should say, within those different projects. I imagine, I'm trying to think if there's a report. I tend to go, and Derek knows this, like just to a custom report real quick, because it really wouldn't be that difficult of a custom report to build out. I'm trying to think if there's a report that shows the housing move-in date right off the top.
Yeah, just because when I'm noticing too, like when I'm, you know, turning and reporting, let's say, you know, I don't know, City of Salinas or something, you know, I'm kind of having to say, yes, this is how many people exited for permanent housing. However, we have X amount of people who are in housing that we're currently working with. And I didn't know if there was just a way to avoid that kind of additional explanation, if it was just like in the reporting, but it might be a custom report. Yeah, like you were mentioning.
It's at the 260 that gives you information.
Yeah, 260 is that data quality completeness report. Just do viewing. We don't need to edit it today. And imagine you're just looking for a kind of like a quick and dirty number, right? Like
Yeah, I was just
10 people were housed but not exited.
Sometimes they'll want to have, you know, an HMIS report, and different programs will want different things. But I was just thinking if there was a way where I didn't have to try to explain or justify the report and say, but actually the numbers are this. And, you know, there was a report on HMIS that could just reflect those numbers. You know, I didn't know if there was an option, and then maybe that would make it easier. But if not, you know, it's working so far, what I'm doing.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, we're always looking to make things a little easier for everybody. I've got to click the little button first. But yeah, see, the housing move-in date shows here, but this is like kind of a client per client basis. So I think to get what you would want, just a quick like report that you could run and see how many clients are housed but still in your project. Probably would be a custom report would be the quickest way to do that. Just because then you're not having to filter down through some of this stuff, you know.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, really good question though. And always not to put Derek on the spot, but Derek and the team, the HMIS team over there, do have access to the WellSky customer portal. And there is an area where they can submit like feature enhancement requests. So if there are things that, you know, reports or functionality that you think would be really good in the system, he can go in and submit what is called an idea. And then other customers across country basically can like upvote and downvote those ideas. And our solution management team, like the engineering team essentially, actually goes in and looks at those ideas. And that's kind of how they use that to help kind of drive new functionality in the system. So.
Okay, thank you.
If you guys have any really good requests like that, like build a report that shows clients that are actually housed, I think that's a great idea.
Taking note of it now. Canned report for.
I've already stolen it. I'm gonna submit that one myself, so I get credit for. Yeah, great question though. But kind of what I was gonna say earlier is that the agency admins are such a strong part of the continuum. I mean, you guys obviously are the ones working with the case manager, with the clients, everything. But to have a really good understanding of HMIS, because a lot of the case managers will look to you guys for direction and guidance with HMIS. And there's just not enough Derek's in the world to, you know, support every single user. And so the communities that I've worked with that seem to really do well with their HMIS systems are the ones where they have a really strong agency admin base. So keep it up. What other questions do we have? Let's open up my box a little bit more. So you can see all the names and start calling people out.
I have a question,
Yes.
and it's going back to the COC APR.
Okay.
How long do the reports stay up on the queue before they disappear?
The report run history.
Yes.
I actually have no idea. This is relatively new functionality, and I do not know how long they stay there for. I can ask though, and I'll let Derek know. I'll ask the engineering team or the solution management team. They don't like to be called engineering.
Oh, actually, going back to Ivan's question, you can collapse that report history by clicking the little click it twice. There you go.
Yep.
So maybe that
If they're
fixes
still
that
there.
problem. Or,
Yeah, and when you get a long one, it should start wrapping it. I think once you get up to like 7 or 8, it should start taking them to the next page.
Mhm.
So it's not gonna you're not gonna have to scroll down through millions of report run history things to get to your APR. But yeah, I'm not quite sure how long those are set to stay in there for. So I will ask about that. Never had
Thank
that
you.
question before.
Tyler, could you show off the this might not be relevant to everybody in here, but a lot of street outreach teams and emergency shelters do end up doing services, like tracking a lot of services, and you just showed everybody how to assign their own pick list for services, which people are excited about. Could you show them how to run the services report?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few different reports that you can run, and it really depends on, are you looking for more of a detailed service by service, client by client report, or are you looking for more kind of aggregated information? So I would say most like higher level project managers and everything would prefer the aggregated information that's found through the client served report. And so if you click this, and this goes for like any reports, you're always going to have prompts or parameters to a report. So we do have the ability to run a reporting group again. So if you do have a reporting group set up, you can choose that. Otherwise, you can choose, I'm just going to choose my provider here. Looks like there's some data in the rapid rehousing provider. Otherwise, you can choose a specific provider. And you can choose it for this provider only, or if you wanted to grab the subordinate providers or the providers that fall beneath it in the provider tree, you could check this little radio button for this provider and subordinates. As far as services goes, you can narrow it down to certain things. So if you're looking for, specifically shelter stays, you could select shelter stays. If you're looking just for referrals served by the selected provider, you could narrow it to that. If you're just looking for the services provided other than shelter stays or the referred services, you can select this, or you can select all three. Grouping, you can either have them receive services as a family or as a household. Now, this one, usually it defaults to receiving services as a family because that's usually what most people want. But what that means is when you're actually applying a service transaction and you select the other family members in those like little check boxes to include them as part of that service, that's what you're doing here. Clients in a household will look at the household composition and not whether the clients are actually receiving the services. It's just, are they part of a household? So most of the time, you're going to want to see who's receiving services as a family. So if you have an individual come in for services and they go through, that one person receives services and that's it. If you do clients receiving services as a family, it would count that person like as just one. If it's clients in a household though, and that person was part of a household, it would actually count them as a household because they're in a household. Anyways, it's a little confusing. Most of the time though, I would just stick with receiving services as family. I feel like I'm talking about this too much. Moving on, funding source. So if you want to narrow it down to a specific funding source, you can do that. Service code, if you want to narrow it down to a specific service code, you can do that as well. So if you only want to see what services you have for rent payment assistance, you can go through, select it from your quick list, or you can always go through and look it up. If you leave any of these fields blank, right? So if I don't select a funding source, or I don't select a service code, it will actually execute the report, and it will go basically without that filter in place. Serve date range. So if I want to do it for, let's say, almost this quarter, maybe. And then you can also put in an old date range here as well. This allows you to run this report and compare different parameters. So if you want to do last month versus this month, last year versus this year, last quarter versus this quarter, this is how you could do that. So we'll do this. That's technically not right. So there we go. Perfect. Treat open-ended referrals / services as one-day services. So when you're applying a service transaction, you have a service start date and a service end date, right? If there is no service end date, that's considered an open-ended service. And so what this will do is it's going to basically automatically populate, or it's only going to use that service start date when calculating this this served date range here. So if that service start date falls between this, that's when it'll pull into the report. If you click no here, what it will do is it's going to kind of use more of that entry exit based logic, where if a service is open during your service served date range, that's when it'll pull that service in to the reporting. So for example, if you have a service that occurred, the start date was, let's say 10/1/1995, and there is no end date. If I run the parameters for right now, that service way back on 10/1/1995 will pull into my report because it is still open. Most of the time, if something's open a really long time, it's a mistake. Somebody just forgot to put in the end date. So I usually run this with the open-ended services treated as a one-day service. That way, we're only getting services that start between the served date range. Legal adult age, it's 18 here in Florida. So we're going to keep it 18. I don't know in California. Maybe it's different in Monterey. I'm actually not sure. I still haven't found the community that has a different legal adult age, but if you do need to change it for some reason, you can. When you build the report, you'll see that there's really not many services going on here, but it kind of has the same feel as an APR, where if there was clients in here, let me see if I can't go back a little bit far, just get some sort of clients. Yeah, no. Anyways, if there were clients in here, you would have your little hyperlinks, your little blue numbers. You'd be able to click on it as though you can in the APR when there's clients, and you'd see which clients. So yeah, it gives you some basic kind of demographic breakdowns, family members, race, ethnicity. And then what's probably the coolest thing is down here at the bottom, it actually tells you the different types of services, the funding sources that those services are associated with, and then the number, the cost, everything associated with those services. So without actual data on our professional services training site, it's not terribly exciting. I'm trying to think if there's something, maybe my outreach project. Or actually here, I have an idea. We'll do Tyler's Homeless Service Emporium plus subordinates. See if there's any services. I got one client receiving services. But yeah, down here at the bottom, of course, it's brew pubs and warm farms. So one client received 3 services. You'd be able to see cost if I recorded those, which I didn't. So yeah, it's a pretty slick little report, pretty straightforward. And it's not based on entry exits at all. It's only based on the services that are being provided. The other service report that you have available to you is the service transactions report. Let's do this system-wide. Again, you have the ability to narrow it down to a specific type of service. And then you can go down through here. Let's go back a little further. So I feel like there's probably not that much data. Service provided date range. And this is going to give us like every single service transaction. So you'll be able to see, you know, this again, this is for kind of system wide, but you'd be able to see the name of the client, the need, which provider it was created by, if it was a referral, where it was referred to, the type of service, and the service provider. So yeah, this is more of kind of like the nitty gritty, getting down to the details on the service transactions that are being produced. In addition to this, there's also some other reports in ART. I think there's a few reports in Click as well, that would allow you to look at service transactions.
Very cool. Thanks, Tyler. I think it's always a hard question to answer. Like, how do we, or not a hard question, but a hard problem to tackle, right? How do we record services to show our funders what we did, right? It's at the end of the day, you can always follow the money and go through your financial department and see how many times you did this or how many. But I think this is a really effective way, as long as you're, like Tyler said, brush your teeth every day. As long as you're going in here and recording every time you give out food on a street outreach run, you can go back and then show your funders with that report. Hey, look, we in the last month gave out 90 different food things to people, and it's nice to have. It's a cool tool that's in here.
Yeah, there's definitely definitely a lot of functionality that exists. I feel like some communities don't make the most of it. And then there's always like kind of add-ons like along that kind of funding thing. There's the module called Fund Manager as well, where you can manage entire funding. So if you have different, you know, streams coming through funding, let's see, you can actually like allocate to different providers, and yeah, it just track every single request for funding. So there's definitely a lot of more detailed things that you can get into with it. But at its base, if you want to track, you know, a funding source and how much, you know, the cost of each service, that could be easily done just through kind of the normal service transactions workflow.
Very cool. So I think we're getting a little low on time here. Maybe time for one more question if there is one, and then we can take a quick break, and I'll just kind of go over some different policies that agency admins should be aware of, and then we can dismiss for the day. So is there one more question here? If anyone has one.
Who's the lucky person? Could it be Vanessa? Or maybe Petra? Beatrice?
It doesn't look like we'll get
Yeah.
any takers. So Tyler, could you just one thing, this is something that I see a lot when I was cleaning up a lot of data for the reporting season. That's head of household errors. And the one thing that I noticed that is kind of hard to figure out where to push a button for this to do it. But like, let's say you've got a family that gets into a project, and then their kids aren't with them at that exact moment. The kids comes to stay with them, and then grandma comes to stay with them like a month later, and then 2 months later, and then grandma gets housed out of that, and then they leave. Like, how to show that happening without making and deleting entry exits and having the correct story reflected.
Yeah, so there's a couple different things going on there. So one is in the system, you have the households tab. And the sole purpose of this tab is to basically group client records together, right? Let's make this less confusing on Yogi Bear's record. I'm actually going to delete one of these households. In an ideal system, you want to try to keep it down to, basically like one household here and not create like a bunch of different households, because that just adds like a lot of confusion into managing this whole thing. So once you have your household set, so Yogi Bear's in here with Boo Boo and Kentucky Fried Pigeon, then you can go and enroll them into a project. Now, one thing that you'll notice is as you're creating your household information, you're connecting those client records, there is a field here for relationship to head of household. And this is a little misleading, and I've actually made multiple recommendations to remove this from this area, because this is not the relationship to head of household field that HUD is recording. This is just kind of for informational purposes only. It's to give you kind of a good idea of who may be the head of household. But when it comes down to like reporting for head of household, that relationship to head of household on like the APR and the CAPR and any of your reports, it's actually done per entry exit record set, meaning that it's captured within, I do not want to review that data now. It's captured within the enrollment into the project. This client has a bunch of stuff. So once you have your household, and I'll go back and show you how to kind of add household members and everything. Once you have your household set, once you've basically said these household members are actually, connected in some way, then when you create your enrollment, you have the ability to connect those household members and say, all 3 of these clients are actually enrolling into this project together. So if not all 3 of them are going, you would want to make sure to select which ones are actually enrolling in the project. What this does is it creates like an audit field, like this hidden audit field called an entry exit group ID. And for reporting purposes, that's what's used to determine like, all right, these are the people that are actually together, not necessarily the actual household tab. So that's why I always say is like if Yogi and Boo Boo are going into a project, but Kentucky Fried Pigeon is not part of this, you don't have to go in and like remove them or delete them from the household or delete the client record altogether. You can just select Yogi and Boo Boo to go into the household. So let's say all 3 of them are going, and let me try and get them into this permanent supportive housing project here. Say it's HUD, and then just for sake of ease, I'm going to backdate just a little bit here. So, oh my gosh, the assessment on this, Derek. Let me see if I can't find another project that's better. No, not much better.
1 year better.
Let me make a quick configuration change here to make this work. So display settings, we should have our 2020, which this is the one that you guys should be using. So if you get into a situation where you're seeing something from 2016, let your system administrator know, and they should be able to update the assessment. Or if you're not seeing the information that you should be seeing, or if you're not seeing any information, chances are you're going to need to update and collect information that's recent. So that's definitely something that your system administrator can kind of help with. Okay, let's go back into Yogi Bear's record just real quick. So you go through, let's say Boo Boo's in there with him. We're going to look at that Tyler's permanent supportive housing project, or rapid housing. What did I modify? I think I'd modify the rapid housing. Change date. Let's get the 2020 assessment now. And so as we go through this 2020, and this should look really familiar to you guys. As we go through here, we want to make sure that all the data is complete and we want to make sure that it's accurate. Just because data is in here doesn't mean that it's accurate. So we should be updating this to reflect the current living situation at the time that the client entered this project. So if Yogi, and that's the client record that I'm in right now, I'm in Yogi Bear's record, identifies as the head of household, I would want to make sure to indicate self, head of household, for the relationship to head of household. This is the field that the HUD standards look at right here. So it's important to get this one right.
Okay, that just cleared up
In
a lot
addition
for me.
to this, we also want to make sure Boo Boo's record has a relationship to head of household. Now, where you can get into some data entry issues, which Derek, I'm sure, probably got into a bunch of them with the LSA, is if I selected yes for for Boo Boo and for Yogi, then we have this conflict on relationship to head of household, where both of your clients are identified as the head of household, and that's can't be. So we need to make sure that maybe this is the spouse or partner, although I don't think that's their relationship. Maybe it's another relationship to head of household. So we want to make sure that this this accurately reflects that relationship. All right. So we'll go ahead and save. Yogi's looking good. He's identified as self. So that works for now. We save it. We have this enrollment into the project. So all is well. Now, Yogi and Boo Boo decide they want to adopt a child, let's say. Well, so how do we add that new household member to this existing project start date without, just deleting this and recreating it? And how do we get it to reflect accurately the timeframes that everybody's entered? Well, so we're going to start by going into our household composition here. So our household tab. So we have Kentucky Fried Pigeon, Yogi Bear, Boo Boo Bear. We can manage the household, and we can always add a new household member here. So I can search for the client. If the client already exists in the system, Babu, maybe baby. So Baby Bear, we can execute a search. There's a Grand Baby Bear. So that's not the one that I want. I just want normal Baby Bear. So Baby Bear doesn't appear to be in there. If it was Grand Baby Bear that I'm looking for, I could just add them to the household by clicking the little green circle with the plus in it. If it's just Baby Bear, if it's a different client record, then I would want to go through, fill in this information, Social Security, veteran status, and I can add a new client with this information. Now, what this is doing is it's actually creating a brand new client record in the system. Remember, this household tab right here, this is just basically connecting the clients together and saying they exist, these client records that exist in the system are part of the same household. So if I add a new client, this is actually adding this client as a brand new client record in the system. Once I do that, then I can add them to my selected clients. And I can continue. We now see Baby Bear is part of this household now. We can see that when they joined the household was this date. And so you can see Kentucky Fried Chicken actually joined in 2019. Yogi and Boo Boo, that initial household was created in 2016. So it's kind of giving me some insight into when these records joined the household. Now that doesn't mean that they entered into the project during that time. So we're going to go ahead and save and exit. So I can see Baby Bear is in here now. I can go back to my entry exit. Now remember, although I just added Baby Bear, I'm still in Yogi Bear's record as of right now. So how do we get them connected into this project? Well, we need to include them into the existing record set here for this rapid rehousing project. And so somebody has a little jingle happening. Ah, there it is. And so, yeah, what we can do is we can go into our project start date here. And we can include additional household members as part of this. Once I do that, I have the ability to include these other household members. So if it's baby bear that's getting included, I can select baby bear. Once I continue though, and I save, something is going to happen that we do not want to have happen. Is we are actually saying that the project start date is on 3/17. And that's not necessarily accurate for baby bear because he came in, let's say today on 3/24. So we're going to have to just kind of suck it up and accept it at this point, and then we can change it in a second. So we're going to go ahead and save and continue. And you can see right now, it looks like all 3 clients came in on 3/17. So what we'll want to do is we'll actually want to go into baby bear's record and click on the little pencil next to baby bear. And what this is going to do is it's going to select baby bear's record right here. And see how that's grayed out? That's because I'm looking at this enrollment as though I was baby bear. And if this is too much or if this is too scary, you can always go out of it and switch completely over to baby bear here, submit it, and then go back into this area. But then it involves a couple more clicks and everything. So usually when I do this, I go into the Rapid Rehousing, I include them, and then I just do it through this area right here. Again, this is just my preference. So once I'm looking at this enrollment as though I was baby bear here, then I can uncheck Yogi and Boo Boo, and I can change the project start date. And I'm going to change it to today's date, 3/24. Now, when I save and continue, you can see that for baby bear, it actually changed that project start date. But for, whoops, didn't mean to click on that. But for Yogi and Boo Boo, it kept that original start date. So, yep, then you'll want to fill in baby bear's information. So if baby bear is, you know, again, make sure you don't have any conflicting information here where you put him as like head of household or anything. So we'll say like it's the head of household's child, save and exit. That way, this enrollment has all 3 clients. They're all tied together up here. So they all share that enrollment. They all have their information entered. They all have the correct, you know, head of household identified. That's within that you know, entry exit. Because this one up here where it says relationship to head of household has nothing to do with the relationship to head of household that you're seeing on your APR or on your CAPER or your path reporting or any of that good stuff. So the field for relationship, just to kind of refresh you guys, this one right here, this is the data element, the HUD data element that's found per entry exit. Did that check off the kind of what you wanted, Derek?
Yeah, and yeah, on the other side of that, let's say Yogi decides that this is all moving too fast. Or no, Boo Boo decides it's all moving too fast, and he's not ready to have a kid in the household with them quite yet. And he chooses to leave. You can either exit them with that kind of same workflow by moving to them in the entry exit and deselecting the other members, or by going to Boo Boo's profile from the switch to another household member and just adding an exit date, ensuring that the other members aren't checked there as well.
Yeah, exactly what Derek said. Just don't check them up here. It's moving way too quick for Boo Boo, our destination. He's going with some other, you know, family or friends. Tenure, save and continue. You can see that the exit date's in there for him. you'd want to obviously fill out, all your information there. But now it looks like he has exited. But if we were to switch to Yogi or Baby, they are still currently enrolled into this project. So yeah, the whole household situation can get kind of complex for sure, but try to always, document it. And this goes for any information in HMIS. Always try to document it as accurately as possible. If there are scenarios, so like if Boo Boo's leaving under like a weird scenario or something, guess what? There's an area for notes about that. Throw some notes in here, or have your case managers throw the notes in here, because this helps just explain, like, if we're looking back on this, or we're looking at data quality, and just any explanation can kind of help bring some context to why maybe Boo Boo left. So it's always good to have more information than less information. All right.
Tyler,
Yes.
I have a quick question, and just for confirmation purposes. So going back, can you click on the household tab for me?
Yes.
And when you hit manage household there, you see those all the way to the left, the red minus. So you're saying, and this is a situation where I've dealt with many households where you have, let's just say, mom with significant other, and significant other gets exited totally at 100% out of the picture. You never want to take the significant other off by hitting that red, I don't know what you call it, but
minus sign.
because you still want to have that tracking. So you're gonna exit them out of how Derek just explained, the same way you would add someone into a project, right?
Yeah, that's a great point, because I usually don't recommend removing them unless like for sure, like the significant other is not coming back. Because then, yeah, if they come back into the household and they go into for other services, then they have to it just kind of creates more confusion than it needs to be. So this is just connecting those client records together. So if you leave them in there, it does no harm. But you just want to make sure to, accurately reflect when they exited out of there, but you don't necessarily need to have them leave the household.
Okay, that's what I wanted to just confirm.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, because then there's some kind of weird scenario that you can kind of get into here. Like if you did have them exit and then come back, I forget exactly what it is. It's oh, and then you were trying to correct data, or like, oh, maybe we should have had them actually enter in beginning. You can't have them enter into a project before they join the household, and so their join date is now 3/24. So yeah, I usually just leave them in there. And you'll just kind of create less headaches for yourself and others down the line.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, very welcome.
So with that, yeah, we're getting really low on time. So I'll go ahead and say we can go ahead and say thank you and goodbye to Tyler, and I'll just kind of take a quick 5 to 10 minutes here to go over some quick policies, and I'll send you all on your way. So Tyler, thank you so much for
guys. It's been fun spending part of the afternoon with you, or my afternoon, your morning. Yeah, good luck, and I'll see you guys around.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Tyler.
you.
Bye, guys.
All right. So yeah, we're running low on time. I had a lot more that I wanted to talk to you about, but as I mentioned, we're in the process of overhauling our website in a way that's going to make our lives a lot easier in the near future. So I'm really excited about that. I think it would be appropriate to have a separate kind of policies and procedures training at a later time to reflect that, as I mentioned before. because there's going to be like an online portal and you'll be able to submit documents through that, and you won't have to email me the license request anymore. You could just do all in this portal. So I think it's going to be really nice, but it's not existing yet. So I'm not going to talk about things that don't exist. The one thing I wanted to mention here, and then I'll just let you all go, is that as Tyler mentioned, there's only one of me and there are 24 of you here, and you're really important parts of the community. And we're expanding so fast. We're at like almost 150 HMIS service point end users. So I'm going to be relying on you a lot moving forward now that you've gotten this training to assign EDA access to your own users. So after they receive the training, you can set up your own EDA groups, or you can just give them whatever projects they need to be given access to. Immediately after I activate them in the system, other things like questions that general end users might have, like case managers, I'm going to start routing them back to you all to try to self-resolve. And then if you don't know how to answer the question from your case manager or end user, then use the help desk, email me, and then we can try to resolve that through email. And if we really have to, I can set aside schedule some TA time over Zoom to help you resolve those issues. So again, any questions about kind of that, how that's going to look? And I know there's differing levels of experience in the room here. I recognize that. So if you need me to show you how to do some of the stuff that Tyler showed you to support your staff, you know, I'm willing to set some time aside for that. The more time I spend with you, the less time I spend with the case managers to resolve their issues. And I think that you'll find that a lot of these things being resolved in-house is going to move a lot faster, because I just got out of this really nasty reporting period where I just really couldn't get to a lot of stuff in time. And I'm just glad that we finally got this training done, and we can get the other training out of the way, and we'll be set up to kind of a self-sufficiency level with our community moving forward. So there was more that I wanted to say. I think I'm just going to kind of wrap this up. Are there any lingering questions from the training and what I just said? No, great. Well, I'm going to pop the, as if it wasn't redundant enough, I'm going to do one last time here. I'm going to put the sign-in sheet in here one more time in case you didn't get a chance to complete it. And I'll thank you all for spending 3 hours with me this morning. And
Eric, can I ask you a question? Sorry, I typed it in the chat earlier, and then I kind of went to navigate the site. Some of the service coordinator case managers on our site don't have, or at least seem to think they don't have access to the Mosby cars. As we kind of track what SPDATs maybe need to get done. We're a step up in Salinas, so we're real new to this process, including myself. So as I familiarize myself with it, I'm still kind of learning some of the basics. How do I tell on the screen if they have that access? It says they have the license for Mosby, but I don't know if that means they actually can see the cars and sort of track if it's been done, if that makes any sense. You told me you gave me the example of the EDA tab, and then I went through it, and then I'm just like, I don't know if I'm doing it right.
Sure. So actually you could share your screen, and I could just like annotate the screen and show you kind of where to click and everything. So you can just
let me pull it up real quick.
Get some hands-on training here.
Thanks. Let's see. Get this out of here. You can see it okay?
Yep, I can see it fine.
Great. Okay, so I'm here. I noticed that there's an EDA tab, and then I went to admin to look up the username and number and all that stuff and see if I to track the licenses.
Yeah, so go to admin there. Find the
So-
user that that doesn't have access to it.
Yeah.
And I might actually need to set up some. Okay, so go up to the top now
Okay.
to enter data as groups right there.
Yeah. Oh, enter data groups.
Yeah, the tab. They do have access to Mosby cars.
Yeah, I thought so. Maybe okay, good. Because so they're just having some difficulty navigating the site, and like I can help them on that this afternoon then.
Yeah. And so what you would have Lisa do is when they log in, just have her for cars, it's recommended to enter data as cars. Everything else is kind of set up where you can enter data as just Mosby a step up on second. Some users like Interim have other users EDA, but we kind of try to stay away from it because it can be confusing. But
okay.
If they're doing a cars assessment, EDA as cars first.
So then I'd go like this and then click the plus button right here.
Yeah. Now
Okay.
you're entering data as Mosby cars. So visibility settings are applied to be whatever they are for cars. So if you were entering data as step up on second, you would have different visibility right now. So that's why we do that, because there are some community members that do cars assessments that aren't necessarily homeless services providers. So we want to limit that.
Gotcha. And then from here, I'm actually legitimately going into the cars process and about to facilitate the assessment. And this is sort of the preliminary work that needs to happen.
Yep. So from there, you just go to client point. And then search for your client.
Gotcha.
You have the ID or create a new client. And then you could go through the same thing that's in the training that you or your user did. And so from this point, everything should be pretty analogous to what you learned in the training.
Cool. Thanks so much for clarifying.
No problem. No problem at all. So, any other questions? We got 3 more minutes here. No one? All right. Oh yeah. Soledad?
I noticed this is being recorded. Will we have access to this later in case we want to reference anything?
Yes, of course. I'll put it on the site because we didn't use any client information. That's why we had Tyler use that the website with all the brew pubs and the Tyler's Homeless Emporium and everything, so we can actually make this public. So we'll post it on the site, and then we'll actually have, like I said, when we get the new site with the portal and everything, where you could actually log in, it'll be available in there too. We'd like to start doing more recorded trainings and have that in the portal on the new site to be easier for you to reference that. So yeah, this will be made available to you all.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, everyone. Have a great day. Thank you for coming. Thanks for all that you do. Bye, everyone.